I'm Dana Denha, and you're watching FYI. We all have been spending a lot more time at home. Some of us may be getting tired of that outdated wall color or grimy old floor. If you're thinking of change, there's a place in our area that brings a one of a kind artist touch to any room. Take a look.
Established in 1992, Motawi Tileworks has been making an impact on the design world with their unparalleled creations.
Nothing else looks quite like Motawi, so there's something distinctive about the way that I put shapes and color together. There's an artistic stamp.
Noel's vision has created unexpected artistic collaborations.
I have lots of books, and I basically look through and see what catches me. So it's an issue of, I would say, personal enchantment. And then I also actually work with other artists whose work I admire and feel like it lends itself to Motawi's tile making technique. And I have licensing agreements with those people, including Frank Lloyd Wright, who's not around anymore. Think of that as a collaboration across time. The tile are pressed, they dry, air dry, they get fired one time, and in the ceramic world we call it a bisque firing, so they become as hard as a stale biscuit and a little bit porous.
Motawi's process is key in the creation of these distinctive textiles.
So then we apply the glaze either by dipping the tile in glaze for our installation tiles or by bulb glazing, and then we fire them again. And the glass melts, it fuses to the clay body, and then you have a tile. When I was in art school, you could make one amazing thing, and that was great, and you didn't have to repeat it. Of course, in manufacturing, you have to make the same beautiful thing pretty much the same every day, and so process becomes critical. What I want to do is enrich people's lives with the beautiful products that we make, and of course, the way that I run the company.
For more info, visit Motawi.com. Snow is in the air, and as soon as those white flakes accumulate, there's some need to know info for residents and business owners. Learn more about snow removal guidelines in this month's City Roundup in 60.
Hello, my name is Robert Keller with the City of Ann Arbor. Winter means snow and ice, and that makes it hard for people to get around the city, especially pedestrians. So as a resident and business, you need to do your part and help clear your sidewalks of ice and snow. What does that mean? Well, for residents, it means any snow accumulation greater than 1 inch has to be cleared within 24 hours. If you're a business, any snow accumulation by 6 a.m. needs to be cleared by noon the same day. So help do your part, clear your adjacent sidewalks, crosswalk ramps, and any concrete bus stops that may be adjacent to your property, and help make it easier for people to get around the great city of Ann Arbor.
The world breathed a sigh of relief now that some of the population has been vaccinated for COVID-19. But the pandemic is far from over. Many of us are still vulnerable to the virus, and with the B.1.1.7 variant, it's become even more dangerous. That's why if you are exposed to the virus or have symptoms, it's imperative to get tested. Joining me is Yashar Niknafs, CEO, and Ani Shirvanian, Clinical Operations Manager for Lynx DX. So you guys, why don't you tell me what Lynx DX was doing prior to the pandemic so we know what you're all about?
Sure, and thanks for hosting me and Ani. So Lynx DX was founded as a startup. We spun out of the University of Michigan. I did a PhD at Michigan in molecular genomics. And so my mentor and I started this company to commercialize a prostate cancer test. We had a urine test that was a diagnostic to detect prostate cancer. So we started the company to kind of get that test off the ground and get that into the hands of clinicians. We did some fundraising in 2019, and then in January of 2020, we finalized our first fundraising round, got some physical space, and moved into our location in February of 2020. And then obviously we know what happened in March. We were at very early stages of getting our prostate test up and running. So we were kind of actually in a really good spot because we didn't have a whole lot of overhead. We were just kind of ready to go out the gates. So we were able to pretty quickly pivot and kind of direct our focus on COVID. And pretty much since then, we've been full throttle developing the COVID testing and expanding that.
So have you put the prostate cancer test on hold for the moment?
We're still working on it. We're continuing some development of that. I think, the lion's share of our efforts are dedicated to COVID. But we have a team that's working on the prostate test, and it's still actually running commercially. You can order the test today. So we're working on that in parallel, but there's such a great demand and need for COVID testing. I think just from the standpoint of wanting to help with the pandemic, we're dedicating a lot of our efforts there. But obviously, for the sake of the company and the company mission, we're continuing to work on that as well.
Well, I mean, because when you talk about it, I mean, we know prostate cancer affects a lot of men. My husband has a history of it in his family, and I feel like a lot of times it's taboo and people don't talk about it, but I think it's good to bring it out there and talk about that there are easy tests available to make sure your prostate is healthy, and you guys are at the forefront of that, so that's fantastic. So why don't we talk about how you sort of adapted then? So, you're a startup, you're just starting up, and then you changed into this COVID testing site. How did this happen?
So, well, interestingly, the prostate test is technologically very similar to the COVID test. So our prostate test measures RNA levels of some cancer targets that are specific to cancer in urine. So COVID is an RNA virus. So in one test, you're measuring cancer genes in urine, which is just a fluid. And the other test, you're measuring for COVID genes in some transport media. So all the instruments are the same, the way you extract the RNA, the way you do the RNA quantification with the PCR machine. So we were fortunate that we actually had some of the machinery that we would have needed to do COVID testing. So really early in the pandemic, these RNA isolation machines, ours is called a Kingfisher, they were in high demand. And we actually had people reaching out, asking us like, hey, can we use your Kingfisher? And then we actually didn't have our PCR machine when the pandemic started. So initially we were like hoping to get involved, but we didn't have our machine. So, but then, the stars aligned, and I think early April, the machine showed up. And we had been quoted like 3-month lead time or something like that. So at that point, we had everything we needed. And we had, like I said earlier, we were a spin out of the University of Michigan. So myself and a number of other people that were sort of on the ground floor of the company had very extensive scientific backgrounds in molecular genomics and diagnostics. So we were well suited to, had a team that could very quickly work on validating the test, developing the test. And we had some good connections too that had experience in getting CLIA labs up and running. So it really, it was just a lot of elbow grease early on to figure out what we needed to do. There were a lot of supply, everyone talks about supply chain issues. So, how do we find reagents, pipette tips? How do we get the swabs? How do we get the transport media? So like all these things were just little mini hurdles that we just kept tackling over and over and over again and building the team out. We brought Ani on board very early on to help with a lot of client relations. So it was just kind of one thing kind of started leading to the other. We were fortunate, we made some good connections early on with county health departments, state health departments.
So you guys are like a partner. Now you're partnering with Michigan Medicine and the county.
That's correct.
For these COVID tests.
Yeah. So
we got added to the rural testing task force for the state of Michigan. And that's when we started working with different counties across the state to help testing pop-up drive-through sites, Benzie, Leelanau counties, Traverse counties, and kind of got our name out there and started, outreach to the community to help with testing.
Can we talk about what kind of tests you're performing? So I think I've had a COVID test, I've had a few, but what specific COVID test are you guys performing at your drive-through clinic?
So we perform a PCR test. and we have a few different ones. So our sort of the bread and butter swab test is what everyone talks about. So that's where we started. So it's a nasal mid-turbinate test. You take a swab, you put it, I don't know if I have one, you put it halfway up your nose, and then put it in some transport media. You do an RNA extraction, and then you put it in this PCR machine that measures the levels. So then in October, we started having some early discussion with University of Michigan, who was working on building a COVID response plan for testing asymptomatic individuals and doing surveillance testing. So at that time, there was a few other institutions who had built a saliva test. University of Illinois was one of them, and Yale had these sort of people, people knew about these saliva tests. So we kind of started looking into it, and then we sort of employed our scientific team. Like I said earlier, we had a lot of really adept scientists, and we started validating and debugging our own saliva test. So we took that online with the University of Michigan in October. That's also a PCR test, but instead of using a transport media, basically it just uses saliva. So at the end of the day, it's all kind of the same thing. It's using
there isn't like a difference in accuracy between, that's what I was sort of wondering, because you kind of hear people talk about the different tests that you can take, and they're saying like, the one that you shove really far up your nose is more accurate. Is that true?
So the when you shove up really far is the nasopharyngeal swab. So that was sort of the first one that was out, and for a long time it was considered the gold standard as being more sensitive than some of the other tests. I think at this point, you have the PCR tests, and then there's these rapid tests or antigen tests. So I think that those are sort of the two tiers that are worth discussing, at least initially. The rapid tests don't measure for RNA, they measure for some of the proteins of the virus. And just intrinsic in that technology, it's less sensitive. So there's this trade-off with the rapid test. It's faster, it's cheaper, but it's less sensitive. And so early on, we were not really interested in getting into that market and didn't want to get involved there, because I'm just thinking about, how do we actually tackle COVID? How do we actually quell the spread of the virus? And the major issue with COVID is asymptomatic transmission. If there was just only symptomatic transmission, this would be the flu. We wouldn't have a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So the problem is you need to detect the virus. You need to detect presence of the virus as early as possible. So with these rapid point of care tests, they can detect the virus, but the viral load needs to get above a certain amount.
So it might take a few days longer for it to show up on one of those tests.
Right. And we've actually seen that in-house. We have a number of times when someone has gotten the rapid, it was negative, and then they test positive via the PCR. The rapid will come positive a couple of days later. And really those 2 days there, that's the crux of it all.
Yeah, that's when you're sort of
we have a pandemic.
Exposing people when you don't know what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, those are the 2 days where, person X was walking around the halls of their office getting everyone COVID.
Yeah.
So the antigen tests, also, rapid tests, point of care tests, all those, terms kind of are for the same type of test. They're just less sensitive. It's better than nothing in certain circumstances. But so that's like one distinction that I'll outline. So the PCR test is way more sensitive. It can detect like almost down to dozens of molecules. So so then you get into the terrain of, okay, once we're in the world of PCR, which is a whole different technology, what are the sort of strata of sensitivity there? And then it comes down to different techniques and sort of primers and probes that are used. But let's just like say, I don't want to throw shade at company X or company Y. So let's just say all those probes are sort of equally efficacious. Then you come down to the sample type, which is the question you asked.
Mm-hmm.
So is a nasopharyngeal more sensitive than a nasal versus a buccal swab versus saliva, et cetera? And so from what we've seen, there's roughly equal sensitivity in the studies that we've done and others have done. There's actually, I think what we've seen is there's actually probably not that much difference between a mid-turbinate and a nasopharyngeal. And then saliva, the studies that we've done, they're not huge scale, but we've seen very strong concordance with the nasal swab in our saliva test. There's interesting differences in the dynamics of like when something will become positive, when it stops being positive. But in general, our saliva test, we've seen it to be pretty robust. And one thing too, I'll just point out, now that you asked this question, something that comes up a lot are the false negatives.
Yeah.
And the problem with COVID is you can be infected and have virus that's in some of your cells, but not outside of them. Mm-hmm. So there's really like no test that can find them. Even the best tests in the world can't find them. So a lot of times, when people are talking about, oh, this test is a false negative, I would say, I trust the test to tell me whether or not there's virus there. Mm-hmm. The PCR test is extremely sensitive. If there's virus in there, it's odds are we'll find it. The problem is you may not be showing any virus for you got infected on Sunday. You're not going to actually have any virus present until Tuesday.
Yeah, the time frame is exactly a factor for sure in all.
So, right. So on Tuesday you'll test positive, but you were infected Sunday. But the thing is, what the test will correlate with strongly is infectivity. Mm-hmm. So that's something I'm very confident in. I say, my litmus test for whether or not I feel comfortable with our test and its quality, would I be willing to sit in a room with you without a mask on if you tested negative? If you took an antigen test, my answer to that is no, absolutely not.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you took a PCR test, my answer is yes, I'd feel very comfortable sitting in a room with you without a mask on, but I don't know if I'd feel comfortable tomorrow because you could flip positive in that time. Sure. So what I would say for people to, sort of a rule of thumb that I would say is the PCR test positivity, I believe, tracks very, very strongly with infectivity, but maybe not whether or not you're infected. So there is a need to test regularly. And that's why, like, nursing homes, we test. In areas of high prevalence, we test them twice a week. We actually test our staff every single day.
I think that's really good to know because, like I said, there's all this information out there where you hear people saying, one test is better than the other. But honestly, the deep nasal swab is very invasive, and I don't think anyone really cared for it. So if you could go to Lynx DX and get a saliva test that's going to be accurate, I personally would prefer it because when I was getting my COVID test, it was really just related to having an ailment not associated with any real COVID symptoms, but a doctor's office wouldn't take me unless I had a negative COVID test.
Oh, gotcha.
So it was like I was going to these places and getting these deep nasal swabs. I knew they were going to be negative, but I had to do them in order to get inside of a doctor's office. So talking about that, we're actually going to take just a little break and we'll be right back with more from Lynx DX. We're back with Ani and Yashar, and they were talking about Lynx DX. And, you guys are testing for COVID in the Washtenaw County area. And we were just talking about the specific saliva test that you guys are performing on people when they come to this drive-through COVID testing area. Ani, did you want to show us sort of what it looks like and what people can expect when they're being tested?
Yeah, I guess I just, first of all, want to say that it's a completely contactless experience when people come to the drive-through. So if there's any concerns about safety, it's extremely safe and we sanitize everything and you're never going to be touching you're never going to be coming into contact with something somebody has touched. It's extremely contactless. And all you have to do is register online and show up to the drive-through. You have a QR code on your phone that you scan when you get there. And then you're given a kit, which looks just like this. And inside there's a funnel and a tube. And this is the funnel, this is the tube. And essentially all you would do is unscrew the cap on the tube, put the funnel in the tube, and spit in that tube, halfway or so, and that's it. So it's a completely non-invasive procedure. It's very comfortable. You do it in the comfort of your own car. And we have, hundreds of people going through a day that we're able to process. So it's a great experience.
I will say I like that idea of it being really contactless, because the other tests are not contactless. So there's someone's coming into they're not coming in your car, but their hands are coming into your car and their hands are by your face.
Yeah.
So
it's a little
it
frightening.
actually seems safe.
And on the way out, you actually, you just drop it in a bin.
Oh, so you're not talking. Yeah, that's awesome.
So,
that's a really great.
We have a little grabber, one of those grabbers, and we hold your head to the bag, and then you drop it in the bin and you drive away.
I love it. That's amazing. What a great way to test for COVID. Like, way to keep thinking about how to keep people safe.
Yeah.
Kudos to you for that.
Yeah. The only consideration is, you can't eat or drink 20 minutes prior to the test. So typically you just show up and hopefully you haven't eaten anything or drinking any liquids. But other than that, it's a very easy procedure and it's comfortable. You can do it in your cars. So we've had a lot of people give good feedback about that.
Well, and another thing I've heard about people talk about, and you guys specifically mentioned this on your website, is the concern for having to pay for the test out of pocket with their insurance or not having insurance. So what's the deal with that?
So for the time being, since the start of the pandemic, there's been a federal mandate that tests are covered without deductible and copay. And I believe the Biden administration is going to continue that. So
so that's just something we need to clear the air about. People don't need to worry about the fact that they might not have the insurance to cover a test. If you feel symptomatic or you feel like you were exposed to someone, just
So you
just come get tested. And the state of Michigan actually has implemented a way to cover tests for uninsured individuals as well. So really, the government's actually done I'd say a pretty good job of making sure people can get covered. Sometimes it's not clear to people.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to pay my copay. So I don't know how publicly that's known, but a lot of the funding
is very public. Yeah, I think it's to put that information out there, because I do think there are people that are hesitant to go get a test because they're worried about what they're going to be paying for it.
Right, and a lot of the funding that was allocated for testing, I believe, was allocated in some circumstances to these various insurers and payers so that they don't have to, so the copays are covered. So I think I don't know who made these decisions, but part of the strategy there is, okay, we're going to help pay for COVID tests by covering it through insurance. So you kind of follow standard channels. So, but people should not get a bill.
No one will be turned away.
And that might change at some point in time, but at least for the time being, the government is covering these tests.
So you mentioned, Ani, that you have to register in advance for the test. So you go on your website, you register, and then how long in advance are you registering for the test? Is it that day? Is it the next day?
So once you register, you receive a confirmation email that has a link to make an appointment. And if there's an appointment that day, you can schedule your appointment for that day. So there's no requirement for, a day in advance scheduling. It's really just about availability, and you can register anytime. And like I said, you just make an appointment. We're open 7 days a week. We found that a lot of people go, either before work in the morning or they'll come after work in the evening. Throughout the day, we're open. So you can find all of that information on our website as well. And if there's any updates, we'll make sure to update that.
Well, it's good to know where to go to get a test, because I will say I haven't had a test since like August, but when I was initially told I had to get a test, they told me to go to CVS, and I called CVS and they're like, we don't have any more tests here.
Yeah.
So then I reached out to a coworker and I'm like, I don't know how to get a test, but I have to go to the doctor. And she told me to go to a local urgent care that was doing it. But it's good to know that there's like where to go, because I think that can also be a confusing thing during this time. People don't necessarily know where to get the test. And you guys have a pretty good response on 2 days, and you get your results back around that.
Yeah,
or less. I think our average turnaround time is about a day, but we don't, we quote around 48 hours just to be safe. But I think in almost all circumstances, you'll get the results the next day or the same day if you came in the morning or something.
Yeah, because some of these tests, you'd be waiting 4 or 5 days or longer. And it's good. I mean, like you're like nervous. You're like, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be cleaning for all this
Yeah,
time?
no.
So yeah, it's good to get that result back quick to know, you get away from people and stay by yourself, or you're fine, whatever it might be. Before we go, is there anything else you guys wanted to add about Lynx or COVID testing, or why people should not hesitate to go get that test if they feel like they need to?
Yeah, I definitely want to just add that you don't need a doctor's order. So I know that question comes up a lot. Do I need a doctor to order this test? Do I have to have symptoms? The answer is no. Anyone can get tested. We have a partnership with the Washtenaw County Health Department for open access testing to the community. So this is open to anybody who wants to get tested. Uninsured individuals will not be turned away. You are asked to provide insurance if you have it, but if you don't, then you will not be turned away. And I think those are the main things I wanted to make sure that your viewers know about. So just, continue to spread the word. We're open 7 days a week, and we're happy to help you.
Yashar, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd say, your question to saying anything to the community at large, just like what I was saying earlier, there is this period of time when you could be positive and not test positive. And I truly believe one of the only ways that we're going to successfully end the pandemic is to identify these people that are asymptomatic, that are transmitting the disease. So, if you are suspected of exposure, or, I do think, people need to get tested more. If we could test everyone in the world immediately right now for 2 weeks, we could test the entire population every day for 2 weeks, we could end the pandemic.
Yeah, because you could set those people aside and they could be quarantining.
You quarantine them and then it's over. The whole thing's over. But, obviously it's not trivial to do that many tests. But I do encourage people, to do it. And if you do have a suspected exposure, don't get tested that day. That's another thing, I don't know if people realize, but you're not going to be positive for like three days, 2 to 5 days it can take. So, or even more. So, and if you're like, oh, I tested negative, but I don't know, I was exposed, you maybe need to try again in a few days.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for coming on the show and filling us in on what Lynx DX is doing for our community during the pandemic.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Dana.
For more on this and other programs, visit a2gov.org/CTN. Visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor to see all that we have to offer. And remember to like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time to FYI.